Okay, so where I was going to start was, as you know, I've written a couple of different kinds of books, and I will talk through kind of how I decided to approach them and why I approached them the way that I did. And I'm sure there's all kinds of people you could talk to that have a different approach or a different idea or different methods by which they put together content in a book. But these are the ones that I've done, and it'll give you a place to start. So I'll start first with the autobiography one, because that was the one that probably took me the longest to figure out. It was the first book that I wrote, and it was, so it just took longer. Every time you try something the first time, it just takes longer because it's a learning process. After that, it gets a lot faster, it gets a lot easier, all that sort of thing. So this one, I had a couple of things in mind when I wanted to write it. Of course, I told you last time that one of the big reasons I wanted to write this particular book was because I wanted to learn how to publish. The bigger thing for me was learning how to publish. The content of the book, I didn't necessarily worry about. I figured that would come. But when I actually sat down, once I figured out where I wanted to publish it, when I sat down to actually think through how I wanted to put it together, you can find all kinds of resources on Google, and one of the things talked about, well, you could do it in chronological order, or you can do it by, significant events, or you can do it by whatever method you want to. And so it got me to thinking about, so one thing I tried was this. I sat down, I'm Southern. I love to tell stories, and there are stories that I tell about myself and my family that I just love telling. And so I sat down one day and I wrote like little story names and made a list of the stories that I like to tell about my life, regardless of when they happened, regardless of anything like that. And then I got to thinking, well, how would I want to group these? And the thing that came out for me was, since Tony's reading the book, she probably has figured out now that I am a drummer, thus the name for a different drummer. I started playing drums when I was 10 years old. I was actually naturally good at it. There's a lot about that says a lot about me, of who I am and all that sort of stuff. And so I thought, okay, I really like that title, A Different Drummer, and I'm going to use that as my working title. And I thought, well, there are things about drums that I think could give me some natural categories to put my stories underneath. Okay, so for instance, playing the drums, whenever we marched to the stadium or something like that, the drums were always in the lead. So to me, drums lead something. Also, drums provide like that baseline, that foundation for music. It's the beat of music. It's that foundational piece. So foundation was this idea for a chapter. So when I thought through all the different things that drums represented, sort of in a meta level, high level kind of way, I came up with 5 different categories that eventually became my chapters. And then all the stories that I had listed out that I wanted to write about fit underneath those 5 categories. So that's how I organized it. So I'll stop right there, and if you have any questions or...
But you don't necessarily, so drums is something that is important in your life. It's something that came natural to you. So do you necessarily have to have a theme?
No, and even about the drums, it just gave me chapter headings. It's not like the whole book was written around my life playing drums. It isn't. But the concept, like leadership, okay, that was the important thing. And I didn't even describe in the book how I decided to organize it or anything like that. It was just my way of gathering my thoughts and organizing my thoughts about how to write it. For me, the drums gave me the ability to organize it. That is all. And the different drummer is the fact that I'm unusually good at it for being a female. I was very, very good at it. You know, those themes kind of run through it, but it's, you know, not everything is about the drumming at all. It was just a place to kind of pin things on to help me to organize stuff.
One thing I noticed in your book that I thought was really interesting, I expected it to be a chronological event type book. And it begins with stories about childhood, but you jump from childhood to adulthood, and then sometimes you go back. And I like that it wasn't consistent. I like that it did go back and forth so far. Right now, I just finished a chapter where you went into the Catholic Church and that experience. Mm-hmm. It came right off the back of something that happened when you were young. And I thought that was a good way to group the stories, because it really kept the interest level of the reader up, because they don't really necessarily know what you're going to talk about next.
Right. Yeah. So I definitely didn't go the route of the chronological. I thought that would be too boring.
Yeah, you did a good job with that.
But it was
plus, as you can see, I'm a very conversational writer.
Yes.
I write as if I'm talking to somebody.
You do.
You know, so, you know, it's not formal language by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, it is me. It is me. And if you met me, I talk the same way. Right?
Yeah, that was hard at first, because I'm so used to reading textbooks and everything written in third person. Mm-hmm. And at first I had a hard time with that. And then once I started getting into it, I liked it, because I just felt like I was in a conversation with you.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun. Yeah. Really different from what I'm used to reading as a student.
Yeah. So I will tell you that the organizational challenge of putting together your first book will be a challenge. It will be, you know, how do I put this together? In what format do I want it to be in? And that was the process I went through. I just figured, since it was my life story, I wanted it to be, you know, of course I tell certain stories about my life, and I just tried to figure out how I could group them together. And usually that initial thought that you have may be the best thought that you have about how to organize it. And so think of it as a working title, working contents. And if it works out that it, you know, that initial thought works out, it'll work very easily. And my initial thought actually worked out pretty well, you know, but don't be surprised if you start going down a path, and then you get stuck with it. And it just may be that the organization of it is not allowing you to flow in your writing. And that's okay. You know, just allow that to happen as it happens, and then kind of work with it and see how you can get yourself unstuck. It might require a different way of organizing it, or maybe a different thought process about how you group things together. But that's how it worked out for me. And I would imagine that for other writers, it's probably a similar process.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Once I kind of had the idea of how to group things together, I probably wrote it within, you know, if you crunch all the time down, you know, it probably, you know, because life happens, it probably took me 3 months to write it. But if you condense all the time that it took me to write it, probably about a couple of weeks if you crunched it all down. It was a subject I knew well. I didn't have to do a lot of research, you know, it was just regurgitating things that I had experienced and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, different books might be different in how long it takes you to do it and all that kind of stuff. That was how I decided to do this one. Now, I don't know if you remember, but back on the other Zoom call that we had, I was showing you how you can choose a format for your book. So whether or not it's 8x5 or 9x16 or, you know, those types of formats. And And on CreateSpace, it actually gave you a template. So once you decided, I want my book to be whatever size, you know, whatever dimensions, you could download a template from there that made it be in that size. The way that you can do that in Microsoft Word is on the Layout tab. You go to the page Setup, and you see this width and height. So this book was 5 by 8. That was its dimensions. And on CreateSpace, that is the dimensions that I chose. I don't think I downloaded their template. I just knew that I could also set the size here on the page Setup. You know, my title went on the first page when I copyrighted it, and I actually copyrighted this book, and I showed you where to do that in the last video with the U.S. government. And then my small dedication, my preface, a prologue. Now, all these elements you don't have to have in there. You don't have to have a prologue. You don't have to have a dedication. You don't have to have any of those things. These are just things that I thought I wanted to have for various different reasons, okay? And the prologue for me was really important because my life was one of those where, you know, it was challenging in a way, like most everybody's is. And I had this interesting relationship with my parents where things were, for the most part, very good, but there was one element that was not all that good. And I decided that my prologue was going to be about this dream that I had about my mother and father when I was in my 30s. And I thought it would set up the book really well because it was the one thing in my life that I felt like actually gave me the key to dealing with them in a way that I worried less. I was concerned less. Whether or not we ever resolved the issue was therefore, because of this dream, something I could let go of. I could let go of any expectation. And so I thought that this prologue was really important for someone to understand how I eventually kind of got to the space where I dealt with them and dealt with this one issue that we had between us, because it could have been something that, you know, ate me up guilty-wise, you know, once they passed away in 2014. Of course, this book was written in 2013. It was published in 2014, and they died that year. So, so that was an important part for me, and it was actually part of the entire organization of this book. So that prologue became important for me, but it may not be important for anybody else. And feel free to jump in with questions or comments at any time.
The prologue was a really smart addition to the book for you, because when I read it, it really intrigued me because, as you know, we all of us touched on a little bit about my mom dying, and I went, oh my gosh, that so relates to how I feel, and made me dive right into the book. And otherwise I might have been slower to read it. You know, I would have been like, okay, I'll get into this. But then once I saw that, it made me jump right in and go, oh, I have to read this. So that was really smart. I would definitely add a prologue that was something that would grab my reader, because that was a smart thing to do.
Yeah, and that dream that happened, I think I was about 35 years old when I had that dream, and it was a dream that I actually had, and it was like, oh,
Thanks.
I don't actually have to solve this. Yay! It was so freeing. We're now at the table of contents, and I think you can kind of see now. So drums provide structure, they provide tempo, they are a catalyst, they communicate, you know, so all of those were those things that I kind of thought about when I was thinking about drums and, you know, the kind of the impact that drums have had on my life. And so I felt like I could pretty much put all of my stories within those different categories. You'll also see here that I have a table of contents. So if I made any changes to this, I could just refresh this table of contents and the pages would update and everything. So if I added a story or took a story out, I could just come here and update this, and it would get all the all the pages in the right order.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I've done that.
And so then the rest of it is, you know, just me sitting down, writing different stories, etc. And then down towards the bottom.
Oh, I can't read that yet.
Oh, I know. But that was basically how I wrote that particular book and how I organized it and all that sort of stuff. So I figure, you know, that would be a good place to start. Then I'll show you a couple of others and some other things about, you know, how I did other books. And then, okay, so the other thing I did want to show you, I had showed you that government website on where to get your copyright. And so this is what the copyright looks like. And so I have that saved on my desktop. And that was $30.
So I know I asked you this once before. When you were writing your book, you know, so obviously if it's an autobiography, you're talking about people in your life. Mm-hmm. And you did not have to get permission from any of them, or did you change names?
Like with my mother and father, any conversations that I had were from my perspective. I was not in any way saying this is what my mother meant or this is what my father was thinking or anything like that. And since it's from my experience, they can't take me to court. They might not like what I said.
Okay.
But
right.
They can't take me to court over my experience.
Did they ever get a chance to read it? I know they died.
I don't think they ever did. I don't think they ever did. And I didn't tell them I wrote it either.
Oh, smart.
But at the same time, there was always that possibility because of the fact that, you know, a lot of my classmates that I went to school with, you know, and all that sort of stuff, a lot of them knew that I had written it and they read it. And they were constantly asking me about people in the stories because I didn't use any names. I mean, they obviously knew who my parents were.
But nobody else.
But I didn't use names anywhere.
No, and you wrote a lot about classmates.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they've badgered me at times about, well, who were you talking about? And it's like, no. That will go with me to my grave. Thank you.
Or you can tell us and we'll tell them later.
That's a clever way of getting around it is just by not using names.
Yeah, and I didn't. But you know, everybody that I know from Pickens County, Alabama knows who my parents are. And okay. So, you know, there was a possibility somebody could say something to them, and I figured if it happened, it happened. But, you know, all that my parents could do would just be mad at me, you know, because I also know that no matter how I wrote it, to some degree, they would, if they ever knew that I had written it or ever saw it, would get a little bent out of shape. And, you know, that's okay. I mean, I wrote it completely from my experience, and, you know, there's not a whole lot you can do about that.
No,
you know,
but it's good to see.
It's just like with the book out about the Trump White House and all the stuff that Steve Bannon said and blah, blah, blah. You know, people are all posturing, I'm going to sue. And it's like, there's nothing you can sue about.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
It's too bad your parents did not get to read that, because as a parent, I find myself apologizing a lot. Now that my kids are growing, go, oh, I didn't know this then. I didn't know how to do that. And I'm so sorry that I yelled at you, and, you know, all these guilt things.
Well, my parents were not nearly that.
No, I imagine they were not. But it would be good for them to see your perspective. When I get to hear
I don't know. It's one of those things, and it really kind of goes back to that thing of like, in this lifetime, they're not ever going to come to a different perspective. They just weren't. You know?
They were just set in their ways, and that's a shame. Yeah, it's like that. It really is. As a parent, I get how it's hard to. You think you know what's best. You think you know, but you don't.
Right. And so it helped me a lot to get to the point where I knew that it was not ever going to change in this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. You know, it's not my fault. I don't need to feel guilty for it.
Mm-hmm.
And all that sort of thing. So it
Release it.
helped. Yeah, it helped a lot. And it helped the relationship, I think, because then I had no expectations about it. You know, and it's when you have expectations about it, that's when people get their feelings hurt, and that's when they get mad at each other. And and we had that happen a couple of times because I had only one request ever with them, and they crossed over it a couple of times, and it instantly.
Will I read about that request?
You might, but basically it was, do not treat me any differently than my brother. And every once in a while they would do that, and they just couldn't understand why that sent me off the deep end every single time it happened, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I struggle with that with my parents and how they treat my daughter. And so I just have one sister. She has 3 boys, so Nicolette is the only girl. And, you know, my parents, thankfully, love her beyond belief. And regardless of who she is, what she is, they accept her and they embrace her. And I sometimes struggle because my mom will sometimes say things about, you know, Nicolette, and she's so great and she's doing this, and let her know we support her. And
yeah.
And I wonder, like, all right, you know, I get it. You accept her. That's fine. But you don't need to treat her any different. But on the other hand, she does contact my parents frequently. So she does have a stronger relationship with them. So I don't know, you know, I'm struggling with, is it because they have a stronger relationship with her, or it's because they want to make themselves feel better by saying, oh yes, you know, my granddaughter is gay and we love her. So I don't know, you know.
Yeah. And the thing is that, you know, as far as my brother and I, we were the children of my parents. You know, I am sure that they treated their grandchildren a whole lot differently than they treated us.
Yeah.
You know? And I know that my parents loved us, but the way they did it sometimes was just a little disconcerting, you know. And you have to come to grips with that and figure that out and try to move on from it. And really, this whole book was about how I tried to move on from something that was not ever going to change, and how you can sort of approach that in a way that retains some of the relationship, maybe not all of it, and that you can kind of separate yourself and disassociate yourself a little bit from it, because if you get too involved and you get too involved with trying to make it work, it can actually make it worse. So that was the whole idea behind it, and it gave me the ability in a way to so like I said, the very first thing I wanted to do was to learn how to publish, and writing the book was kind of like, you know, there's that stake in the ground, that part is done, and it was almost as if a new part of my life started to happen after that.
Yeah. In terms of publishing, so you see, you know, these books that are on the New York Times bestsellers, so they obviously go through a very different process than using CreateSpace to publish their book. But once you I guess if you self-publish it through CreateSpace, is there a way that you can work your way up into becoming on the New York Times bestseller list, or does it have to be a book that's published through a major corporation?
No, I think that a bestseller list is a bestseller list. If you sold millions of copies, you know, you would be up on that list. You know, I can't imagine that you wouldn't. Now, I don't know how the New York Times bestseller, how they get their data, you know, but or, you know, where they pull it from. But I bet they pull it from, you know, different bookstores and various things like that. And through CreateSpace, your book is available to bookstores and stuff. So I think that it would be possible, absolutely. I just don't know how that mechanism works.
Yeah. So I could basically buy 1 million of my own books and then make it to the New York Times bestseller, and then more books would be sold, and hopefully I would recoup my money.
Yeah, yeah. And there is such a thing as, a lot of people who write books actually pay attention to how many, where they are in relation to other books sold on Amazon as a space, and you can absolutely, watch that and keep track of that and all that sort of thing. And, those things, are interesting to take a look at. And I know some writers who, as their book moves up, on Amazon, in rankings, they take screenshots of that as evidence that at one point in time, they were number 10 in their niche, or, whatever, So that's all that stuff is stuff you can learn how to do.
Okay, cool.
Right.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
it's like with film, sometimes, filmmakers will create a film, they'll release it to like Sundance and then look for distribution.
Mhm.
If you self-publish, if there's an opportunity, kind of going off of what Gloria was talking about, as far as a bigger publisher picking up a self-published book for like wider distribution. Have you ever heard of that?
I haven't, but I wouldn't doubt that would not be possible. I mean, I think that anything like that is possible, especially if they see that there's a money-making opportunity. I would imagine that could happen. I don't know of anybody specifically that it happened to, but,
There's nothing to prevent anything like that, so.
I don't think so. Not at all. Okay. So let's dive into another different type of format for a book. And like I said before, I've done a lot of family history stuff. So when I knew that my father was passing away, I went to my home, my mother. I went to see my mom and my father so I could say goodbye. And I went in March of 2014. My father passed away in May, but while I was there, I was there for a couple of weeks, and Mom and I were sitting in front of the TV one night watching the news, and I said, Mom, do you have, and I had just published the one book, and I said, I've learned how to publish on Amazon. I said, do you or Dad have the electronic copies of the family history books? And she said, I don't know that we do, and even if we do, I'm not sure that you can actually access them anymore, because they had these floppy disks, from these ancient computers that they had. And I said, okay. I said, well, what do you think about putting the family history books on Amazon? And she thought that was a wonderful idea. Because like I said in the previous video, when they published these family history books, they had to do it in a traditional way, and they had to find a publisher that was willing to publish it, but they had to buy a certain number of books up front in order to make the cost lower for them and everything, and hopefully they would sell all of those books, which they did, but still, they had to sell the Bonner family history book for $75 a piece because, it just, from a cost perspective, was just so expensive and everything. So I said, well, I will, if you don't mind, let me play around with the family history books that you have published. And I'll start with the Skelton family, which was my mother's family. I'll start with that one because it was a little smaller book. And let me see what I can do. And I can hopefully rearrange it, because that's when she told me that. She said, I wanted to put pictures where the person was in the book, but because of the way printing was done at that point in time, trying to do that just exponentially increased the cost of the book. And so this is what I did. Now, one thing I want to tell you is, as I wrote these manuscripts for especially the family history books, my Kindle version of the book, the manuscript that was for the Kindle version, and my manuscript for the soft cover book are slightly different because of the fact that one, in the Kindle version, you know, you can click on links and you can go to different sections really easy, you know, so you actually do want to have links in your book that, you know, you can go, if I want to just read chapter 5, I can click on chapter 5 in the table of contents and it takes me directly to that. In the softcover book, that's not important, okay? So I decided that just for ease of publication, I would have 2 separate manuscripts, one for the Kindle version and one for the softcover version, because that may be important depending on how much clicking and linking and all that kind of stuff you want somebody to do on a Kindle version. So on a family history book, what I decided to do was, so here's my Skelton book and all of that, and there's the ISBN, et cetera, the dedication. And then because I have written other family history books and all that sort of stuff, I have links to those books on Amazon. Okay, so those links will actually take you to Amazon where you could purchase it. And then there's a family history book template that I have. Basically this format is kind of like a shell. It's a template, so that if somebody does want to write something and they would like to do it in this organizational manner, they can download that template from my website. And then I also have a book that is about researching your family history. And it's also about technology and how technology has really made family history stuff so much more robust these days. You know, when I started doing family history stuff, there was no Ancestry.com. There was no such thing. You had to go to libraries. You actually had to go to courthouses. You had to go to these places. And you still have to do that to some degree, because not everything is going to be on an Ancestry.com website. It's just not possible for it all to be there. And there are reasons why you actually have to go to cemeteries and you have to go to courthouses and all that sort of stuff. So that, you know, the boots on the ground kind of thing is still important. But there's a lot of technology tools too that I wanted to write about in a book, such as, for instance, when I started researching my family tree, there are all these places, you know, it's like in Pickens County, there are places where my family have lived that may not be there in 50 years. That house may not be there in 50 years. Something else may have replaced it. So not only have I, you know, taken pictures of a lot of different landmarks and houses and various different places, but the other thing too is that I have taken the GPS settings. I've actually said, okay, here are the coordinates of where this place was. Because before my mother died, we were out, you know, doing some of this stuff, you know, with GPS. And I said, Mom, I've never asked you where you were born. And she said, oh, let me take you there. And the house is no longer there at all, you know, and all it is just woods, you know. But she took me to the exact spot where the house was, and I marked it with GPS, because who would have known that that house was ever there if she hadn't told me that that's where it was, you know, and it was out in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, so I marked it with GPS. And so now I can actually go to Google Earth, you know, the Google Earth tool, and I can actually pinpoint exactly where my mother was born and take a picture of that or make a video out of it or anything like that. So I wrote a book about how I'm using these technology tools to enhance what future generations may know about my family. Okay, so that's what that book is, the Beyond the Dash. So then this table of contents in this book becomes the organizational thing by which you can find people and find families and all that sort of thing. So I did it by generation. So for instance, get out of that. So generation 1 through 4, these are people, you know, who, you know, you're looking at a time frame of like 1600 or so, 1600 to 1700. So they were all born in the same generation on my family tree. And so If you want to look at Joseph Albritton, you can actually click on that link and actually go directly to Joseph Albritton without having to page through the book, because this is the Kindle version of my Skelton family tree. Okay. And so then generation 5, generation 6, 7, 8. So you see that I've grouped them by generation. So clearly my table of contents is pretty long, because I've got, 12 or 13 generations of this family and all the different individuals in there that were born in those generations. But of course, this is just the direct line. This is just, this person had these children. This person had these children. I'm not putting every single person in my table of contents. That would make it too long. But I do have an index of names that's at the bottom. And so there's a way of being able to keep track of people throughout the book, and then you can build an index at the bottom. So, so anyway, let's see here. Okay. So here is my grandfather, my mother's father, William Philip Skelton. So if we go to him in the book, so here's the children of William Philip Skelton. So that's my uncle, that's my mother. And, so you see these pictures I was able to put, where the person is at in the book. Okay, so when my mother died, I found all these wonderful pictures of all of them that I was able to put in here. And there's my mother right there. So I was able to put all that stuff together so that when I was talking about my mother or talking about her and who she married and all that sort of stuff, I was able to put pictures right there, which makes it, I think, a whole lot better. Then the other thing that I did in this book, too, from an organizational perspective is I have a list of pictures and documents. So if you want to see a picture of Barry McGee, you can go right to that picture of Barry McGee. If you want to see a picture of Milton Monroe O'Brien, you can go right directly to that picture. Yeah, so there's quite a few pictures in there. So I have 73 pictures. There we go. All right, and then down at the bottom, let me go down to the bottom real quick so you can see. So here's all these index of names. There's a way of being able to index the names that if you do that process, then when you get down to the end, you can refresh this just like a table of contents, and it puts in all the names of all the people that are in the book and what page they're on. Okay. So for instance, as a way of promoting my book, for example, one of the things that I've done is I took this index of names and actually created a separate document. And so that index of names for the Skelton McGee family line, I put that as a resource on Ancestry.com. Now, I don't know if people are finding that, and that's how some of my sales happen. I have no idea, but I put it there as a resource. It's like if this, if you find family names in here, this might be a good resource for you to get. That kind of thing. About the author, that kind of stuff. There you go. So anyway, that's a different kind of organizational thing, and it's it's what I've done with each and every one of my family history books to make it a very interactive kind of book, especially the Kindle version, which I think is kind of nice to have. And because of the fact that Amazon and CreateSpace are such the cost of production is so low, I don't have to make a book $75. I don't have to make it so freaking expensive like it used to be. I can make it $20, $30, something like that, which is a lot more reasonable, but it also reflects the amount of work that my family put into putting this stuff together.
It's pretty amazing how far back you were able to go.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that too is you find resources that have some of this, and I think you recall from our last Zoom session on these family history books, I've not ever copyrighted them. because a lot of this information, even though I cite the sources and all that kind of stuff, this information can be found if anybody else did the same legwork. So I have not copyrighted these family history books. Now, I told you last time too that I have these 2 boxes full of letters between my grandparents, my Bonner grandparents in World War II. And my paternal grandmother, she came from a family that was very well educated, very well educated. Most of the lines of my family are not very well educated at all. And so on my paternal grandmother's side of the family, I have all kinds of their writings. I have all kinds of stuff going back to 1908.
Wow.
And so all those letters that I have, nobody else has those. I could copyright those if I want to. And I am thinking about putting together a book of writings that my family has done from 1908 to now, because that side of the family, they love writing poetry. They love writing, you know, and I guess that's where I got it in my DNA. I don't know. It must have come from that, because I really like to write.